Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Town Council and School Committee Budget Work Session. Today is Tuesday, March 7th, 2017, and I would welcome everybody to stand up and join us with the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Steve, did you want to say anything before we begin? Okay. You're on.
Hi, thank you very much. We certainly look forward to getting together with you and discussing where we're at in the budget process. Did I? Got it. Better? Okay. So we've prepared a brief PowerPoint for you that I think encapsulates where the discussion is at now, with a little bit of some reminders that you've been that's been shared with you in the past. This I put together for the last school committee meeting to show folks the budget process, and so you clearly live this every day. I'm not certain that you need a primer on it, but so that the community was aware of really how long the process went and what was involved. There were some questions from the community on what is a pro forma, and so we defined it as a predicted budget based on staffing levels staying the same and programs staying the same as they were the previous year. And that's what we do for you for the December meeting. And when we talked about the pro forma at that December meeting, we let everyone know what our anticipated revenues and expenses were at that time. And as you know, it's a moving target. It continues to get more firmed up as we progress through the budget season. We are required to pay more money into the pension this year. We are looking at another $500,000 less in state aid. We are looking at an increase in materials and supplies costs, a $400,000 increase in health insurance for our staff for the same plan we've had in the past. Dental increased by $20,000, utilities increased by $28,000, outside tuitions have increased, transportation costs have increased, and then we are in negotiations with all three of the collective bargaining groups: the teachers, the teacher assistant clerks, and the custodians. In addition to that, the negotiated salary possibilities of increase, teacher step pay, which is a requirement by state law, increased by $232,000. And for folks who are unfamiliar with that, teacher's salary scale in South Kingstown goes 1 through 10. So if I'm a first step teacher, then I would get my raise if there is one that is negotiated, and I would also get a step increase. And the step increases are by state law. So just the increases in health insurance, step, and salary, combined with the loss in state aid, made it impossible to keep the same budget we had last year, even with a decrease in enrollment, and even with a 4% property tax transfer, which certainly no one asked for or is expecting.
Kristen, would you prefer we wait till the end, or do you want us to interrupt you with questions?
Whatever your pleasure.
Okay, I have a question. How do we anticipate, I'm sure every year that we have negotiations, you anticipate an increase in salary for the employees. How do you work that into your budget every year?
So what happens is, usually at a school committee meeting in October or November preceding the negotiation cycle, Mary Ann Crawford will sit with the school committee to determine what we call a budget placeholder for salary. It is nothing that we're committed to. It is how we build. We have to use some figure to build the budget. And so they determined that in executive session, and that's been the placeholder.
Okay, so do you budget for it necessarily?
Correct. We budget for a certain placeholder. It could be 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, depending on the given year, and certainly it wouldn't be 3, 4, 5, but it hasn't been in the past.
We heard from Steve that healthcare might go up by as much as 11%.
That's correct.
This year. So how do you anticipate being able to absorb that?
So it would be the way that we absorb anything. So, for example, Once our budget and your budgets are decided upon, we have a dollar amount from you. And so we would have to do line item transfers and take it from another area, if that were to occur. If I needed 4 new ESL positions that were mandated by the state after you've all approved my budget or our budget, I would have to take it from somewhere else to comply with law. And so we would look to things like usually supplies and materials. This year we are in that similar circumstance where we had more required positions that we didn't know about at this time last year, or even in summer last year, to be honest. And so we had to stop several weeks ago all purchases at the school level in P accounts, and that's where we took the money from.
And what's the timeline looking like for when we would know if it's going to go up to 11%? Thank you.
Okay to move on? So phase 2 of the budget is when at that meeting in December, the town council and the school committee determined a property tax transfer of 2% to use for Marianne to be able to build the budget. So for the community, we explained that even by increasing the local taxpayer contribution to the schools by 2%, the expenditures, it says listed on a previous slide, but it should say our expenditures outweigh the revenue. Staff was therefore required to design a budget reduction plan, which takes into account enrollment, and also within the financial parameters that you, both bodies here, prescribed. In this proposed budget, or the budget that was approved by the school committee, there are no new staff members with the exception of 2 special education teacher assistants that are required by the student's IEP, and 1 additional ESL teacher required by students' ESL plans. And then just a reminder that the loss of state aid, $500,000, healthcare increase of $400,000 plus, and the teacher step pay increases of $232 account for over $1.1 million, and that's the reason that our pro forma is higher than last year. We had a parent at one of our stakeholders meeting request that maybe a slide like this might be helpful visually. So really it's no new information here, but it's a way to sort of on one slide, a one-pager, if you will, put the years, the budget amount that we have been approved for, what the difference was, what our state revenue loss was, what the local tax transfer to schools was, and what the enrollment was. So in red you're seeing a reduction, and in black you're seeing an addition. So you have seen over the years a reduction in our budget amount, but mostly in the black from 2013 to 18, even with decreasing enrollment. And you've seen significant decrease in state aid, which has put us in the predicament of having to cut staff and programs every year. So the town council has given the school department more money every year since 2012 to operate with fewer students. That keeps coming up over and over again. That's an accurate statement. Due to less in state aid and higher costs, and in order to keep the high-quality programs and low class size in all school buildings open and offer our fantastic staff increase in wages, the school department has cut staff and expenses each year. The annual cuts in state aid have required us to do this. We have eliminated 95.9 FTEs since 2009, with a decline of 480 students.
Kristen, FTEs on that number, on that figure there, is that like just teachers and TAs, or
everybody?
It's everybody across the board.
Every person who's employed by the school department is included in the total FTE amount. So this is a change in the landscape of SK. I can't remember how this came about, but it was presented at one of our meetings in response to a question by, I think, a community member. And we took this from the Town Capital Improvement Program presentation because we were asked sort of what is the changing demographics that the town has gone through, in addition to the projections made by NASDAQ. And so if you look, it's the 14 or younger population that's really dwindling substantially. And in 1990, there were over 4,000. And we've lost about 25% from that time until 2014. The 15 to 24 group is actually lowering, and the 25 to 34 group, it's the over 60 age level, and I'm sure you're familiar with this. Not all our constituents were. The collective you, but not all of our constituents were aware of this, so this was information that they asked for. So then so this is a reminder of what the revenues look like, as you know and are very aware of. A majority is local property tax transfer to schools. A smaller piece of the pie is that orange pie, which is the state aid. And then we get those other tiny little wedges, our group home revenue, Medicaid revenue, fund balance, and other. And this is what our expenditures look like in a visual form. So you're seeing the large salmon-colored piece of the pie, more than half, is salaries, and then the gold piece of the pie is benefits. So you're seeing, a large majority of our expenses are salaries and benefits, and then other pieces, purchase services, supplies, and equipment. Sorry. And then this is just a reminder for the community of, the blue is before I came. I can't really speak to that as much, but the yellow is since I've been here, and the bottom is what we're projecting for this year. And it just shows what the percentage increase has been. There were 2 years, my first 2 years here, where it was dire circumstances in the community. And unemployment was very high, and folks just had the reassessment of their property, and it wasn't good news for the town in terms of tax rolls, and therefore, there wasn't much that the community could do to additionally support the schools, but certainly I was very supportive of the schools. And then going forward, you've been generous enough to give us an increase, knowing that our state aid predicament was significant.
Kristen, can I ask a quick question? The expenditures, is that actual or is that projected on the previous slide?
That's for this budget, projected.
Okay. And so
Yeah.
your salaries and benefits are going to be about 80%? Okay.
Yes, 80%. Not sure what I'm pointing at. It's not liking me right now. Do you mind advancing it? Going to the next slide? Nope. Forward. Yes, thank you. This just gives you a visual of the percentage of the budget that's come from state aid, so you can see the sharp decline that our community is working with in terms of the revenue from RIDE. Doesn't like me. And then this has been our school budget history. So we've been, rather stable and had a bit of a dip 2010 and started rising up again in 2016. So I think we've done a good job of trying to manage our own costs, and we certainly have received revenue from the town, even though our enrollment is declining. Ooh, okay. This has been the increase in the property tax transfer to schools, and as you can see, before 2009, there was more money available to the school department, and then it's been on the lower side, climbing up to the 2% range most recently. This is something that community members have also asked for. Like, what does the funding formula look like for some of our other neighborhood communities? We had read in the paper that North Kingstown was asking for a 4% increase, and that perhaps Westerly was looking at having a 0% increase. Well, what does the flip side of their revenue look like in terms of what the state gives them? And so as you can see, it became really depressing when I put this together. I knew we were one of the quote-unquote biggest losers in the funding formula by RIDE, but I really didn't know how significant compared to comparable districts. So Charahoe is a little tricky because they're a regional school district, so to be most transparent, I tried to pull together the Charahoe number with breaking apart Charleston, Richmond, and Hopkinton. But if you look at just, from 7 years into the funding formula, just years 4, 5, 6, and 7 were available to me on the RIDE website. We are down $1.2 million in state aid compared to North Kingstown, that's down $300,000, Charahoe down $153,000 during that period of time. Narragansett up $300,000 and Westerly up $1.8 million in state aid. So we really are in a very different circumstance than neighboring communities are, and there is much more burden on the local taxpayers here because of the state aid piece than there are in neighboring communities.
Why would Westerly, excuse me, why would Westerly be up 1.8?
They got more from the funding formula. So there are communities, Barrington got more. And so there are some urban communities who certainly got more than they had in the past, and it's a formula-based rationale. So there's a double poverty driver, one for median family income and one for free and reduced lunch, but there are many other variables that are included. So poverty isn't the only thing that they look at. Some is spending. Some is your per pupil expenditure and what you were spending previously. And so it all factors in. But it was a 10-year projection, and there are many districts that you would be shocked by that are very affluent districts that are receiving more money from the state than they did in the past. We are not.
One more question, if you don't mind. How do the charter schools weigh into this entire equation?
So charter schools pay a tuition, and it's a charter formula, different than the public school funding formula. And their formula has changed, if you will, recently. There was a point in time where we were paying for transportation, and they pay for their own transportation now. And I don't know if you want to speak more to that. It's not really my area of expertise.
Kristen, I have a question. You just mentioned that sometimes with the funding formula, the per pupil expenditure, when it's higher, you get less state aid. Does it work the other way as well? If our per pupil expenditure went down, would we see more in state funding?
Our per pupil expenditure has gone down, and we've not seen more.
Okay. So it's a one-way street.
Seems to be. So this is to give you, I'm sorry.
One point on that is that there's two elements that are working against the school district. One is the formula itself over that 8 to 10 year period, but it's also the loss of students because the money follows the student. So if you lose 75 students in a given year, that's in addition to the loss that you're going to have from the formula itself. The formula is probably worth around $330,000 to $350,000 at best a year is what the projections were when that first went into place. Dollars in excess of that are probably directly tied to the enrollment declines, or a good portion of it is. So you've got two elements, not just the formula itself, but Westerly certainly would be seeing the same type of erosion in its student base as we are. Any of the communities, suburban communities, are in that same situation.
North Kingstown is actually seeing an increase as of this year. They built a new development, a very nice little development for elementary school children that you can see from the highway, and that's significantly impacted some of their elementary numbers. And also they finally added all-day kindergarten, so they were able to see a bunch of students that were in private and charter schools return to North Kingstown. So I would say, with the exception of North Kingstown this year, that's very accurate. Other folks are seeing an enrollment decline. I think I would venture to say most, if not all, suburban areas in Rhode Island are. So in order to give you the state aid piece, I also took a look at the property tax transfer rate. And so In South Kingstown, we're to the right. We've not, in any one given year, I've sort of highlighted in red who got the least, and in green who got the most, and we kind of don't, we're kind of in the middle. So there are certainly areas that, and at the time that I developed this, Narragansett is behind our budget cycle, so they hadn't sort of drilled down to what they were working with a budget projection. But at the time for this year, it looks like North Kingstown is asking for, and still, as of the last time I read the newspaper, at the 4% number. Charahoe 2.61, Narragansett to be determined, and I think this week they came out with an initial number, and Westerly was looking at 0. But this sort of gives you a sense of the variation by school district. And I'm going to give up on this one. If you can please advance the slide one more. Thank you. So this is the new staff members. This is middle school ESL teacher as required by law, 2 one-to-one special education paraprofessionals. Next. Thanks. This is the staffing reduction plan that we presented to the school committee, reducing 0.5 FTE of an administrator, reducing 1.0 of an exempt, so it's a non-union but non-administrative position, reducing adding 1 and reducing 7.8, an overall, actually reduction of 8.8, add 1, overall 7.8 in the teacher bargaining unit. And then it goes on to say where, as much as we can tell at this moment. Understand that the children in grades 6 through 12 have not finalized course recommendations. That's a big piece of this. But we know that we'll need 1 less section at Wakefield, a grade 2, because there aren't enough grade 1 students to offer that many sections. We're projecting down 4 FTEs at the high school, and then 1 to be determined depending upon class size, and 1 preschool section we're dropping, and 0.8, 2 part-time, very small FTEs of specialists. In the ESP bargaining unit, which represents clerical, administrative secretaries, administrative specialists, and paraprofessionals, we're cutting 2.6 positions, but we're adding positions to offset some of the other cuts, and so in that bargaining unit, they'll actually be up 0.4. Council 94, which represents our custodians and maintenance staff, a reduction of 2.0 for a total reduction of 10.9 FTEs.
Kristen, of all the slides, this is one I struggled with the most. I was at a school committee meeting where you guys were discussing some of the staff reductions, and someone from Council 94 was there and just pointed out that the buildings aren't getting any smaller. Our enrollment goes down, but it's still the same amount of space to maintain. So I guess I'm just wondering, are there alternatives to this for as far as the maintenance and custodial? And also the note on here that says that there's been no reduction since 14-15 year. Have there been retirements that we haven't filled the position, or has there truly been no loss in staffing in that field?
Mary Ann and I are both saying we don't recall any retirements where we didn't fill a position. To us, that's a reduction. Okay. So this has not been an area that we've gone to since the 14-15 year. Yes, every single one of these cuts, it will have an impact on our overall program. Every teacher, every administrator, every ESP member, every Council 94 member. And what I say, as a reminder, is that it's sort of easier to discuss as FTEs, but these are very valuable staff members who have given quite a bit of themselves to our community. We spend an inordinate amount of hours with the administrative team, and then follow up with teacher budget meetings, parent budget meetings, to find out the values of folks in the community. And loud and clear, a lot of what we heard, not at every school, but at a lot of schools, was teacher assistants are our priority. And so then when we were looking at staffing, and you're seeing that staffing is 80% of our budget, unfortunately, we can't come up with this number without going to staffing, and therefore, we cut in areas where we felt it would have the least amount of impact on student programming and overall student achievement. But, we've gotten to a point where I can't stay away from any one group.
Right. And I also noticed that in addition to the 2 positions, you've cut their supplies line item by $48,000.
Correct.
It just seems like you're asking them to cover the same amount of space with less people and less stuff.
That's absolutely true. And I could say the same for what we're asking of our teachers and what we're asking of our clerical staff and our administrative staff. That's the case throughout the school department. So you're seeing that instructional supplies were cut. Instructional supplies this year were frozen months earlier than they've ever been frozen since we had a mid-governor's budget. What's that called? When Chafee did the mid... Yes, and so that's the last time we've had to freeze, and that was orchestrated not locally, that was orchestrated by the state, but we've not had a time where we've frozen supplies at schools until this time.
And I hope you don't interpret my thoughts on this as minimizing the importance of these positions or how hard you guys have worked to determine where they go, because it's not that at all. I look at these work sessions as a way for us to say to you, okay, well, here's the budget as a whole and what we're looking at and what our cuts affect or what our priorities are, and I have no control over where you spend the money or where you make the cuts. So the feedback I get from the community is, well, this is my problem or this is what I feel is important. And just looking at it from a logistical standpoint, I can't imagine how we could maintain our buildings with 2 less people.
It will be harder.
Yes, I'm sure it will. I'm just saying, if you look at it's 6% of the district staffing is for the custodial and maintenance, and then is there any room in the administrative positions, which only got a 0.5 cut?
The administrative, understand that what the best case scenario would be is to afford us the opportunity to staff by student need. We're not in that luxury place right now. Right now we're in a place where I'm cutting things that we need. And so, no, we're not in a place where we can, forego the math curriculum. That's super important to the needs of our children. And what we found is that years ago, our curriculum K through 12 was not aligned, our programs were not aligned, our RTI structures were not aligned, and that's fixed or almost fixed now. So to start cutting program staff would be at a detriment to our students.
I wasn't suggesting the program staff. I was cutting at the administrative level.
So that's the program staff.
Oh, okay.
Yep. So if I'm the special ed director or the
Right.
special ed, and I know you were present at the meeting where we delineated exactly who's in the administrative group. So if we forego the ESL director, and then who's going to coordinate ESL students for services for the students that are increasing at a very rapid rate? If we forego the STEM coordinator, we before the STEM coordinator had no alignment K through 12 with our science programs and our math programs. So what you would hear from parents is, and from teachers, quite frankly, is there's a disconnect between elementary school program to middle school program to high school program. And the person that coordinates all of those are not the teachers or the individual principals. It would be the program staff, the director of that program.
Just like it's frustrating for you, it's hard for me to imagine some of these cuts, and I don't think that...
For me as well.
These enrollment projections were a surprise. I mean, we knew that this was coming, that we were going to see these declines in enrollment. So I guess I'm struggling with how do we design budgets to sort of absorb what we anticipate coming down the line without making these significant cuts.
It's a very good question. When you come up with the answer, if you share it with me, that would be terrific. Because when I was an elementary principal, there was a need you can't cut elementary teachers if there are 10 kids in your classroom or 25 kids in your classroom. It's still a section. Mm-hmm. So that presents as a challenge to us, right? The kids still go to lunch, so someone has to provide supervision at lunch. The cafeteria floor is the same square footage that it was when we had 20 more kids. And so that presents as a very significant challenge to us every single year. Unlike many other communities that don't have that challenge. Either they're increasing enrollment or they're getting more money from the state. We're not. So it's difficult.
Kristen, can you identify for the council, you're you're showing 493.7, when in fact your budget was for 488. Where were the 5 positions that were added in the current year that were not budgeted for?
So mostly, off the top of my head, we had one, I'm going to try to phrase this appropriately, medical leave for a teacher that was unanticipated, and therefore the teacher was being paid out on leave, and we had to hire another teacher in their place. We had special education positions, and we had special education paraprofessionals, and we had a second grade at Peacedale where the enrollment was larger than we anticipated before the first day of school, so we were required to add another section of second grade. Yes, and we changed the structure from child outreach and kindergarten screeners were an outside service, and we changed to bring them in-house into the teacher assistant union, and so those are showing as extra FTEs, but it's not an extra cost. It's the money was in purchase services and now is in an FTE in the bargaining unit.
I just wanted to make sure that it was clear, because if people are looking at last year's budget, and I know that there's been some questions on last year's budget with the FTE showing, and then 193 was showing in what you presented in February. So I wanted to clear.
Yes, thank you.
There is a flexibility that the school committee has in terms of a budget at $60 million to be able to determine whether it's cost associated with health care or whether it's cost associated with positions that were unbudgeted. My only concern is that we're going from 488 that was budgeted really to 482. It's not from the 494 down to the 482. So it just
That's the budgeted piece, but the actual humans is the 493. But, and you, I appreciate you pointing that out. It didn't occur to me that folks wouldn't know that, so it's important to clarify. We live within our FTEs that the school committee has approved unless there is a state law requirement or a contractual requirement to go above. Certainly, if there is an approval of FTEs, let's say it's at 482.8, and one of the special education students that we've identified as needing a one-to-one paraprofessional, that doesn't materialize, because of course this is a every day, every week changing of needs of children, then we have the flexibility of either saying, oh, there's another priority, let's use a paraprofessional for, or not adding that FTE. So certainly in years past, even though 482, let's say, has been budgeted, we have not needed 482. We might live happily at 480 or 481. There is pressure, certainly, to fill those positions anyway, but we don't automatically do that unless there is student need. So this is a brief of one of the slides from our work sessions to say how many administrators are there, how many exempt personnel are there. There's a tendency for folks to lump administrators and exempt folks together. There's a tendency to lump teachers and teacher assistant clerical together, so we did that for you if you wanted to take a look at how much of our budget that represents. And this is of the proposed personnel in this budget, not what we currently have now. And so these are the reductions insofar as we can identify right now. So I know that there's certainly a want to say, like, who is that? Well, the preschool person would be the least senior preschool teacher in our program, and the elementary teacher would not be known. It would be the least senior elementary teacher if there are no retirements this year, but the actual section that would be reduced would be grade 2 at Wakefield. And then we have this process where it's called a displacement. So the person who's in the least senior grade 2 teacher at Wakefield is certainly a lot more senior than many other teachers. And so then whatever openings exist, we have a process and a policy through our school committee to determine the role that they assume for the following school year, but they themselves will not be, without a position. And then so on and so on. It's harder at the high school. We don't really have a good handle on exactly where the FTEs will come from until May, and that's based upon student need and student choice. And sometimes it's not whole FTEs in a particular subject. Sometimes it can be a 0.2 reduction in one area and a 0.4 reduction in another area. Sometimes it is a whole FTE, depending upon who signs up for the courses.
Kristen, I have a question about the, just as an example, the preschool teacher. Is that the SKIP program?
Yes, and that also comes with a companion teacher assistant. So it would be a reduction of a teacher and a teacher assistant.
And so, for instance, what are the hours of the SKIP program?
They're the elementary school hours.
It just seems to me, and I don't expect that you can address this because I know you have contractual obligations, but it just seems to me $78,500 for those positions is not real world.
So we are required by federal law to support this special education needs of children who are 3 and 4 years old who live in our community. And the program that is required by law is not just a purely special needs program. It's also offset with community role model 3 and 4 year olds so that it's a typical classroom, so that they can close their achievement gaps. And so these are teachers that are required to be certified by the Rhode Island Department of Ed. It's a very complicated certification. They have to be preschool certified and special ed certified. So we have very few people in our bargaining unit and in the state who have this very special certification. So by law, every teacher, which includes librarians, psychologists, deans of students, they're all required to be paid on the same contractual salary step and scale as a first grade teacher or a history teacher.
You know, I understand that.
We have no leeway.
There's
nothing we can contractually
Right, I understand
negotiate.
that. There are some kids in that SKIP program that are not special needs, and I understand you just explained pretty clearly how it's blended. And I started by saying I don't expect that you'll be able to. It just doesn't seem real world to the average.
And those kids pay tuition.
Yeah.
Yes, please. So these are the non-staff items that we were able to cut. And I tried to group them by color to give you a sense of the substitutes green. And so we have sub-nurse teachers. We have sub-clerks, sub-nurses, sub-nurse teachers, sub-teachers, substitute clerks, substitute custodians. We've cut those line items. And you can't just cut them. Like, people are allowed to be ill. They're allowed to grieve when there's a death in the family. They certainly will take time off where they're contractually entitled to. But what we've done is go even deeper in terms of what is the professional development that we're offering that they need in order to teach the instructional program. An example is science kits. When URI changes the science kits, and I'm a second grade teacher, I need training in that science kit to be able to teach it. So we've done a lot of that during the instructional day. The feedback that we've gotten from parents is, I'd like my teacher in the classroom. From teachers is, I'd like to be in the classroom. And so we've become very creative with scheduling for meetings and professional development to limit the amount of subs that we're going to be using next year. But it's tricky. It's very, very tricky. And so that's what you're seeing in green. In yellow, it's all technology, and in gold, which I'm seeing now is not very clearly different than yellow, but starts with professional development. That's PD. So we're decreasing professional development, decreasing the stipends that we give to teachers to write some of our curriculum. Curriculum is best written by the teachers, by the experts, facilitated by either the program directors or teacher leaders or the assistant superintendent. We're cutting back on that. And we had, as you know, we've had a increase in the number of ESL students. There was a slide that we had presented to you in December of how many different languages from how many different countries, and we're seeing an increase in our newcomers. These are students who it's like their first day in America, and they have difficulty ordering lunch, quite frankly, in English. And so that's a lot of support, and our community was not well staffed to support or anticipate that need. And so one of the choices we made a couple of years ago is, do we just lay off some of our absolutely fantastic teachers and hire teachers that are ESL certified, or do we provide graduate coursework with a cost share, and that's what we chose to do. So we have a compact with Rhode Island College, and we have teachers that are able to keep their jobs here because they're getting certified in ESL to support those students. But we're cutting the third year of the cohort for that because we're running out of funds to be able to support it.
Kristen, do you think we'll be able to absorb that without hiring more ESL students, ESL certified teachers next year? Because didn't we have it mandated, like Rhode Island mandated that we had to hire another ESL student? An ESL teacher, I'm sorry.
So we've not been in compliance with ESL needs since before I got here, and we've been playing catch up. And at the same time, our rate of newcomers and our rate of students with varying degrees of language acquisition has increased significantly. So until our teachers, and right now our teachers, it's at the elementary level that they are getting certified, until our teachers are through I believe it's a 2-year cohort, we need to have people already certified. And it's in a pull-out program rather than the RIDE required 3 or 4 hours per day of ESL programmatic instruction. So it'll balance within a year or two, but I can't predict. There's no way to predict how many ESL families move in, and it's been beyond what we have seen historically. But it's been typical for our state.
Are there any repercussions for being in noncompliance with that?
RIDE, almost every suburban area, as I'm understanding it, is not in full compliance with the old regulations because there aren't enough ESL teachers statewide. So we are in compliance with each child's ESL plan, but not in a model that would be RIDE regulation acceptable. So RIDE is aware of our model, and they understand that we're making incredible good faith strides, and we have excellent ESL supports. But the ESL director has been a big piece of that. We didn't have an ESL director before 3 years ago. And so when she came in, she's doing all the testing. She's introducing the families to the program. She's guiding the pull-out programs. And students at the high school are in all regular classes with an ESL teacher support, and that's made acceptable by RIDE because of our program director.
Kristen, could you explain how you're saving money on property insurance and also on the capital elevator line item?
Specifically with the elevator, we had anticipate that repair in the capital budget for next fiscal year. Unfortunately, the elevator failed to the point where we could not use it. It was in the high school. So we did get that repair done recently. We're just finishing that repair up. As it relates to the property insurance, what we've decided to do, since we've now have had the one-to-one laptops at the high school in place for a couple of years, we found that we provide protective covers for the laptops, and the students have done an excellent job. We haven't had as much breakage with them. So we have decided to do a self-insured as opposed to going with the property insurance because it's a little more costly with the property insurance, and we think the self-insured would be better suited for us and what's going on. What we've done is we're budgeting about $25,000 a year for replacements for the laptops from grade 5 through 12. It's based on what we're seeing as far as breakage. Like I said, the kids have done a phenomenal job. The breakage has been significantly less. With that, plus as the IT director told us, the particular laptop we bought, he calls it a gorilla screen, so it doesn't break as easy when it does drop. And we got covers that we're using that we provided for every single student. So with the covers and the type of screen, we have not seen the breakage that we had anticipated.
So is the $25,000 for just breakage, or does that include normal life cycle of the...
No, that's mainly breakage.
So we have a repair and replace schedule. It was included in one of our previous slides that shows you over a certain period of years what we're looking at in terms of a replacement schedule, but this is for breakage and repairs. And, you know, we didn't buy the Chromebooks, and that was one of the big decision points many years ago, and a community group based staff members, certainly, and teachers and parents who are in the technology field gave their advice to our technology director. Many communities went with the Chromebooks, and they're I don't want to say flimsy because that's probably not they're not as durable, and so they break easily or more easily than what we've invested in. And so Doug was right. Yes, Doug, if you're watching somewhere, that was a terrific call on your part. And the kids have been very, very good to the computers. And I think they have pride in them, and they take very good care of them. All set on this slide?
Actually, I'm sorry, one more question. The cut in technology account for grade 3 to 5 laptops, you're still doing the laptops, yes?
Yes, but less. So you had asked me and Marianne at the December meeting, build your budget based on a 2% property tax transfer assumption, but also show us what it would look like at 1% and what it would look like at 0%. So if you take everything that I've told you thus far about our budget reduction plan and add these options, these are the options that the school committee would have to weigh depending upon what your requirement was, quite frankly. So all of the cuts from the 2% pages, and they could look to lay off more teachers at a rate of either 90 to 126,000, depending upon area, salary, and benefits. As you know, a majority of our teachers are at top step. ESP members, which are teacher assistants, clerical staff, administrative specialists, and administrative secretaries, are between 30 to 46,000 salary and benefits, and Council 94 maintenance and custodial staff between 45 to 87,000. One of the options the school committee can take a look at is sharing a nurse between either Skip and Matunic or Wakefield and Matunic, because the populations are smaller. That's certainly never been our preference. The medical fragility of our students is of an most priority, but there certainly are schools in the state that don't have full-time nursing staff. So this is in no priority list. High school librarian, that could be a reduction. That certainly is a reduction that we've taken a look at my first year here. It's not none of these are pleasant. None of these are recommended, but they are options. We finally got the middle school librarians back to full-time. When we reduced them to part-time, there was quite an outcry from the students and from the parents. Library is important to the families in this community, and I don't want to say that nursing isn't, because it absolutely is, but that's an area that the school committee can look at because it's not required by law. Guidance, Broad Rock guidance could be reduced or eliminated. That's 6th grade guidance counselor. A South Kingstown High School guidance counselor could be reduced. That would put them at staffing ratios that are well in excess of what's recommended by the school counseling program. But as I've stated, when we had to cut guidance counselors in the past, most specifically at the high school and at Curtis Corner Middle School, we do have social workers and now a dean of students and other team teacher professionals who can support the guidance counselor, but a guidance counselor is a vital role. With the new high school regulations that are coming out from the Rhode Island Department of Education focused on an individualized learning plan, we're going to struggle with our current guidance staffing to support students within the ILP as it is. We could have a reduction of a reading teacher. At this point, based on caseloads, it's likely at West Kingston, which is our highest poverty school, where you tend to have students who either didn't attend preschool or might not have the resources or support at home to be able to have a library at home, let's say. And so we feel we need the reading teacher there, but that's where our lowest caseload is. And then there's always the option of more clerical. We have a wonderful setup at our elementary schools that the parents really appreciate, which is an administrative specialist and a clerical staff member. Certainly in some schools in Rhode Island, there's only one person in the main office of a school. Then, not required by law, but certainly very incredible programs that have supported our students have been SMILE program, CARES, Family Community Engagement, which actually there was a call by the community to add in this area. Reducing it would be very detrimental. And we could eliminate school nurse teachers entirely, but then what will happen is then the nurses that are currently full-time would have to cover in other schools, leave their school to be able to cover in another school, and that puts children at risk. Oops.
Can I ask a quick question here?
Sure.
The breakdown, as an example, for the guidance counselor at Broad Rock, that includes benefits. Is that a particular
Yes,
percentage?
everything on here is fully loaded is what, so yes, it's a salary and benefits, so pension, FICA, healthcare, dental, everything. So this is at 0%. So then you take the first couple of slides, the slide I just went through, and then you add, we can dig even deeper, if it's possible, into the teacher, custodian, or teacher assistant area, read another reading teacher maybe at Broad Rock, and then you go into the really programmatic list for students, which is intramural sports, which we have had the luxury of having. And we have so many children that are not eligible to play varsity sports who enjoy and are able to participate in a school activity in our intramural program. Middle school sports have certainly been cut in other districts. We've protected them because we know there's such a low cost for so many children to be able to benefit and participate. As you may know or not know, summer school programs before last year have been offset by parent tuition, but in Cumberland there was a lawsuit last year where now all summer school programs have to be paid for by the district. Parents are not at liberty to pay. So this school committee made a commitment to honor our summer school program. We had not had one before recently at our high school. Children would have to go to Charahoe or North Kingstown, and what we found is they weren't going, and that's why our graduation rate was not at the level that it is now. So late buses, which give students access to our teachers who are willing to stay after school with them, and to our clubs and programs, we could cut late buses. Elementary school instrumental music and chorus, and some high school sports and clubs. Both were at risk my first year here when it was a significant budget environment. Next. And so then I've always been asked, usually at this table, so what would you put back if we decided to give you more than 2%? I'm unlikely not going to be a question this year, but what the heck, I might as well throw it out there. This would be my priority return. My first return would, and I would say I can speak for the school committee, that they approved the budget knowing that this would be a priority return, but certainly that would be their call. This would be what I would recommend, that the first thing back would be the clerk, then 0.5 of a custodian, because it's looking like the custodians would be like 2 part-time night custodians, likely not at the elementary level, and then a teacher. That to-be-determined teacher that's kind of, iffy depending upon, where the student choice and need lies. Then we really think it's an important priority to get the security cameras back. Then I would go back into professional development, then another teacher, then the other 0.5 custodian, and you see the money breakdown.
Kristen, the security cameras, which particular school is that? Or is that all? Okay.
We don't have them currently?
We do.
We do. Oh,
They have to be repaired and replaced, and there have been requests for more.
So they're functioning now, the ones that are there? Okay.
Right?
I just got a comment. This slide says of the cuts at 2%. There is not cuts at 2%. There is a 2% increase in the level of funding that you're receiving from the town. No one has cut any of these items.
I will be cutting them. So I'm cutting, there is a,
No,
I understand
I'm
from your
concerned because
perspective.
It's a misstatement to say that at the 2% cut. The council hasn't cut anything out of your budget. They're giving you 2% more money
I know, but I'm making the cuts, is what I'm trying to say. So if it was misstated and you're feeling as if that's a council cut, that's not the intent. These are positions that we will be cutting this year. Point well taken.
Steve's
I'm
point,
not sure if that's my last slide, Mr. Alfred.
to Steve's point, if it is a cut, it would be cutting to the highest budget ever. So I
Not ever.
appreciate Steve's point.
In my time, but, oh, budget, you mean general, yes, I agree. I've tried very hard to explain that to our stakeholders. So on February 7th, the South Kingstown School Committee adopted a budget in the amount of $60,573,360, and they also approved, at your request, an RFP for a facilities plan. That was very important to the town council at our first two meetings with you, and I want you to know that the school committee has already sent the RFP out and has already started significant, or I should say preliminary discussions, and have made it a agenda item at every school committee meeting until the plan is finalized. And then what's happened since February 7th? So the RFP was sent out on February 7th. It's due March 24th. We're having public interviews, as you know, for the facilities planning groups on April 4th to choose a vendor. It's 6 p.m. at the South Kingstown High School auditorium. It's a public meeting. Any members of the school committee and town council members are welcome to sit on the interview team. A decision will be made, or hoped, I presume a decision will be made that evening in executive session as to the vendor choice, and then announced to the public. The study will commence immediately after April 4th. As you had stated, this is, you were looking for a pretty quick timeline so that it could potentially impact the next time we sit together to go over a budget. May and June's second school committee meetings of the month, which have historically been reserved for community conversations on topics of importance to parents. This is going to be a topic super important to our parents, and so the school committee has decided to reserve those meetings with the intent of either school committee or school committee town council joint discussions, which you were gracious enough to offer to us at one of our last meetings, focus groups and or community conversations on facilities. We're estimating, because of course we haven't even met these vendors yet, but we're estimating that the study would conclude in August. In September, October, the vendor would present the options and the data to the school committee and the town council. In October, November, follow-up public meetings and vote. To be determined, implementation could be as early as September 2018, but certainly that would depend on what the choice was. So if it was a smaller plan, it could be done in the next school year, and if it's of a grander scheme, it certainly would take more time than that. I think there's one more slide. So what's happened in terms of funding? Mrs. Gledhill brought forward our concern about the more expensive health care. Not that our plan has changed, just that it would be an increase in our rate. In addition to that, as you, I'm sure, are very aware, there's uncertainty at the federal level in terms of federal funding. And so this is, I would say, since 1995, it's the most unsettling feeling I've had about, and that RIDE has given us, about what federal funding to local public schools will be. So we already know that Title II funds will be reduced by 26.3%. So we were planning on $170,000 received in federal aid, and now Pauline has been informed by the Rhode Island Department of Education that we're expecting $125,000. So that's $44,000 less than what we thought we were getting when we met with you in December. ESSA, which is the new No Child Left Behind, has changed the rules required for private school set-asides. And they're actually creating an ombudsman position at RIDE to speak on behalf of private schools. That's new federal regulation. Previously, what we would be responsible for, not in terms, so we're already responsible for transportation for private school students and textbooks for private school students. That has been a long-standing regulation in Rhode Island. But in addition to that, we receive federal funding in Title I, IDEA, IDEA preschool, and Title II. And at some point, we will likely get Title III money because of our growing ESL population, but we aren't eligible for that to date. Typically, what happens is there is an identification system for which private school students who are residents of South Kingstown are entitled to support from these federal title monies, and that money is given to the school either in direct payment or in-kind contribution. So we may pay for professional development, we may send a reading teacher over to Monsignor Clark, etc. What Pauline is being told that we just verified through RIDE is that there is a change federally in terms of what's going to happen with private schools going forward. So typically, let's say at Prout, and these are not exact figures, but at Prout we may have 100 students who are residents of South Kingstown. We would be responsible for the Title II obligation for those 100 students. Now what they're looking at is Prout lives in South Kingstown, therefore our community would be responsible for all Prout students. So that's a heavy lift for districts who have several private schools, especially if they're a private high school. And then there are communities like Exeter or Scituate that don't have a private school, so their contribution would be none. The charter schools, it's important to know, there is no regulation. The charter schools would still get their full Title II allocation, their full Title I allocation, and although they're a public charter school, would not have any obligation to support private school students. And as you know, the school committee is currently negotiating with the teachers, NEASK bargaining group, so that's up in the air in terms of what's to be negotiated. And then as soon as that is complete, later on in the spring, we'll be negotiating with the Council 94 and ESP groups. And that's what I have for you.
Any discussion here at the table?
I just had one question. I think it might have been in a previous meeting. We might have talked about it, but I can't recall. Do we have a breakdown of the average classroom per school?
Yes, I believe that we sent you that information, but we have a complete class size. We do a complete class size piece for the community every year. And so if I didn't send that to you in the piece, and give me a minute, I'll either locate it or I will send it to you. We had a little trouble. Something happened with a utility pole, and therefore I couldn't download anything for today, so I'm paper-based, which is making me a little not as quick on the data. Does anybody have another question while I'm looking for that?
I'd be interested to know, on slide 6, where it says we've eliminated 95.9 FTE since 2009 with a decline of 480 students. I'd be interested to know how many of those 95.9 FTEs were teachers versus other staff.
I'll try to. I'm not sure how reliable we can be in terms of going back 8 years to get you that information, but I will try to work on that for you. So Mary Ann has quickly located, thank you, our class sizes. So at kindergarten, we have contractual class size of 23. Our average in the district is 16.91. Grade 1, K through 3 is a class size cap at 23 by contract. Kindergarten is the lowest class size in the district, as it should be. And so the average class size is 16.91. There are certainly class sizes that are larger than that, and there are some that are smaller. Grade 1 is 17.91, grade 2 is 18.5, and of course there's no 0.5 of a child, it's average. Grade 3 is 20.3, grades 4 through 7 are average class size of 22, grade 8 is average class size of 20, and at the high school, average class size of 18.28. That's why you're seeing the 4 from the high school, because they're eligible to have 27. I certainly wouldn't want them to have 27, but by class size contractual caps, that's what it is, and they're at 18. In the applied arts, It's an average of 16.85, in art and music, 19.7. But if you think of the band, they're not held to that 27 cap. In math, average class size of 17, as it is in world language. English is the lowest in the high school, with a class size average of 16. Social studies at 19, as is the SK series. Science at 17. Phys ed at 21.
Okay. I guess I was trying to figure out on the elementary school side if there are any particular schools that are much different than the average.
So there are different, so for example, at Matunic, we have 2 sections of every grade. And at West Kingston, we have usually around 3, Peacedale typically 4, and Wakefield between 2 and 3, depending upon the grade level. And class size varies because it's by who's in that neighborhood enrollment area. We have a couple of class sizes. Grade 5 is pretty tight because, it's economies of scale. It's all in one building, and so it's not determined by neighborhood. And so when a new student comes in, they go into Mrs. Collins' class, the next new student goes into my class, et cetera. We don't have that same system at the elementary level because it's by how many third graders live in that neighborhood boundary. So we have some class sizes that are smaller, like 10 to 12, and we have some class sizes that are very close to the class size cap, like at Peacedale, and we had to add another teacher.
That was my point, I guess I was looking at, is that
I can give it to you exactly, but I can't give it to you exactly tonight.
part of me struggles if there's a school with 10 average class size and there's another school.
So that's not the case. It's not as clean as that, but I can send the council exact class size numbers as of, we probably pulled this in December, unless you want me to do it as of this week.
December's fine.
Okay.
So Kristen, just comments overall on everything. I feel like something that Raisa said a couple of meetings ago, I don't remember which work session it was, where she said she wanted to feel like the town council and the school committee were going in on big decisions as a team, specifically when we were talking about consolidating schools or looking at the RFP for our buildings. And that kind of resonated with me in that, yes, I think that we should do that because we do shoulder the burden for both groups for a lot of these things. But I feel like the town council is very limited. We can't control where you spend your money, where your cuts are. That's not our job. That's why people elect the school committee to make those tough choices and why you have the position that you do in making those hard choices. So I'm not minimizing that when I say that there are things in this budget I have big problems with. And the reason why I keep pushing on the administrative positions is because the feedback that I get from teachers, TAs, custodial staff, parents, is that they feel micromanaged and overmanaged, and they just feel like that's where the cuts are coming from at the lower level and not at the higher level. And whether or not that's true, I'm looking at the facts and figures that I have in front of me, and all I can do is give you my feedback and what I hear from people. And it's not an attack on you or anybody else, but it's just the facts that I hear. And the only power I have within this budget is to say yes or no. I can't say I like this or I like that, and I'll only take it if you do this. So it's hard for me to look at this budget and see where some of these cuts are when I don't think it's a surprise that we have declining enrollment. I don't think it's a surprise that healthcare goes up or that salaries go up. And that's what makes seeing a budget with such significant cuts at this stage in the game, none of this should be a surprise, I don't feel. And that's why it's so hard for me to accept when I look at this.
Anybody from the school committee have any questions, comments?
So I can hear your concerns, Liz, and these are some of the things that I've seen with this whole process, and I'm granted, officially pretty new to it, but as I look at the whole thing, I think we're still a little bit struggling with this year to year. Let's figure out how much we can spend next year, which starts in June or July. And we don't know some things, so we put in a lot of variables to say, okay, this might happen, this might happen, this might happen. What I think, what I'm hearing is just a general level. All the questions that are pointed, I don't know that they're necessarily to say, are you doing this correctly? It's more like, we have so many questions, and we've got declining enrollment, we've got these increases in property tax transfer. They're answered through these presentations, but it's almost like we could say, all right, forget about this year's budget for just a second. What if we had a picture of the next 5 years and said, we've got some big variables. We know there's new enrollment projections today that are very dramatically different than what we saw in 2010 when I first started looking at some of these things that suggest that our birth rates are way off compared to what we thought they were going to be. With that informs a different reconfiguration discussion that didn't exist 5 years ago. But we can't make that now. We can't say, all right, so let's reconfigure everything over the summer, which is what this plan that you saw in that presentation starts to get to. It starts to say, all right, let's look at that piece, not reactionary, but something in a planning state. And then there's just a few other things, and we still have 3 years left in this funding formula reduction, that if we can just, I feel like we have ways that we can be looking at these things. I've brought them up in the school committee meetings. I've talked to them even before, but there's things like our budgeting methods that we can look at where we have significant enough reserves within the town where we can be tighter on line items of the budget. We can look at things and say, all right, let's get through these next 3 years of this funding formula without a significant burden increasing on the taxpayer, without a reactionary plan that says, okay, we need to close a building in June. You know, like how do we do that? And I think these are some of the things that I think we can do a little bit differently than what we're doing now. We've done. This is still the same kind of approach that I've seen budget year to year. We look at, here's what we need to spend, here's what we are going to have to increase our spending on because these are fixed increases. But they're not fixed forever. They're only fixed for the next year. And then somewhere, like you said, like we know about the enrollment. It's true. There is no surprises on enrollment, and now there's even fewer surprises. We have declining enrollment. There are we lose some in the funding formula when there's declining enrollment, but we also there's less spending that needs to happen. I know we talk about them as people. There's also a regular attrition rate that can absorb some of these costs. These are all things that we can put together if we're looking 3 or 5 years. But if we're looking at today versus July, it becomes a challenge. It becomes this thing where we have to put school sports up on the thing or music programs. And I want to, I'm not really asking a question, but I think what I'm saying here to you is you're skeptical because of this, not necessarily because we don't like that you still have this position here. It's that there's something else that's bigger. I don't know if that makes sense.
Thank you. Any other?
Yeah, I think one of the things to your point, Roland, is that on the third frame, we talk about December meeting in phase 1 and the pro forma, and then at the bottom it says the increase in health insurance step and salary combined with loss of state aid make it impossible to keep the same budget. I don't expect that you would think that was reasonable to keep the same budget if you have all these other factors that should reduce your budget.
Let me approach that also from a different way, is that you're looking at a budget that between benefits and salary is got over 80% of the budget covered there. And so unless you're cutting positions, you're not cutting the program size, because materials purchases, if you take that 80% and then add to that the contracted services that are being used for specialized educators, you're going to be closer to 90% of that budget. So if, in fact, the school committee is saying all of those things are mandated, then there isn't going to be a lot of flexibility, because the health care cost, unless you're going to take health care away in terms of a benefit or reduce the value of that benefit, you're not going to make some major inroads there. The retirement is set through state formula. That's not going to change. In fact, if anything, it's going to get worse if, in fact, the investment yields are going to be knocked down, and I think that they probably will be. So you're going to see an escalation that's going to go up as well. So I guess my point to you, Roland, is that while I agree that I would like to look 3 to 5 years out, I think we can look at, if the cost of living in the state is going at 2% a year, that is a base number that you're going to see in contract negotiations based on the structure of collective bargaining in this state. So I think what you're going to be looking at is, can you get a year with zero? We've done that in the past, but there has to be recognition as to why that's occurring. So my point to you is that it's not a case on a school budget where probably less than 85% is controlled through either the contracted professionals or the personnel that's in that budget. Your purchase services are another, I think, 15% of the overall budget. So you've got some major problems there. The question that Bryant had asked earlier was, what's the classroom ratios? And this is the thing that we talk about, and I'm sorry if I keep hopping on it, but it's the policy question that needs to be addressed as far as the number of sections that are provided for the education program, particularly at the elementary level or even at the high school level. And when you look at this is taking a look at current year on what you have at Matunic. So this is saying in Matunic School, you've got 2 sections, 16 students apiece. First grade, 19 and 17 students. Second grade, 19 and 19 students. Where the documentation indicates that for the classroom size for K through 8, I believe is what, 24?
K through 3, 23, it's right at the top.
23.
And this was as of September 30th, if
what
there's...
you're looking at there is for one school. You can see the same thing with Wakefield. You can see the same thing. Wakefield, you've got 2 Ks at 13 students. You've got 18 and 19 in the first grade. Peacedale, 17, 23, and 22. My point is that when you look at the facilities that you operate, the facility or the number of facilities that you operate has a profound impact on the classroom ratios, because what you're doing is you're not going to be able to move too many children out of Matunic or West Kingston if those schools are open, and it means that if you had less schools in operation, you would have a greater propensity to have 23 students in those classes. I'm not suggesting that 23 is a golden number or that's what they should have. What I'm saying to you is that if your contracts allow for this, yet you can't attain it because of the facilities that you manage, and you've got the operational cost associated with those facilities, that's where one of the things that I'm looking at as being a more important factor to look at than the fact that you've got 80% of your personnel dollars tied up in that core. Because while I'm not advocating for closing schools do provide the issue of reduced cost for operations, reduced cost as far as personnel, that then come into play. Now, the school committee and virtually the council as well have got to make the decisions on what's that policy. Because if you're going to continue to lose 70 to 80 students each and every year, those ratios of the 17 or 18 children in a section have got to go down, because you're losing the pool of students within each of those buildings. So while I'm not advocating to close buildings, I'm saying there's a reality check that's here, is to what level do we, as a community, wish to keep all buildings open? And is there a threshold at, once we hit 12 students, we can't go less than 12 students? Or is it 15 students? Is it 17? But those are the decisions that I think many suburban school districts are going to face. Because if you can't control your personnel costs, and the state dictates how many people you have to have in each of those roles, then the only way you're going to control any part of your budget is to be able to take care of those elements that you do control. But those are major community decisions that would have to be made, but the documentation has to be provided. That's why I think that the study that's being proposed is in fact a very important one. There's going to be an awful lot of people that don't like the answers that they're getting from the data that's presented. But when we look at the fact that, I look at this budget and I say, we've got a budget that's going up $650,000 in expense next year, is requiring $1,027,000 in new property taxes, and has got 80 students less predicted than it had the year before. That's why I don't look at that as a cut. I look at that as a value that's been placed because you're spending more dollars with less students, and you're also, if you're only going up 650, but you still need $1,027,000, and I think that's what the number is. You've got to look at that and say, is that sustainable when the average house value is $350,000 and the average tax bill is now over $5,000? Before we deal with the Union Fire District, or Kingston Fire District, or in some cases with a motor vehicle excise tax. So there's an ability to pay. We question sometimes, why do we have less students? We have less families. Why do we have less families? Because the affordability of the community becomes less and less. So there's a number of things that are working against one another, and if we really want to get control of the numbers, we need to understand what numbers we can adjust and which numbers are there because they have to be there. And that's what, when I look at these type of enrollment numbers, I say, this is the first test to say, is this something that people understand as far as what it means 3 years from now if we continue to look and just say, well, this is okay, we'll just increase the budget by the 650, we'll put another $1 million in, and we'll do that for the next 3 years. Well, where are we in 3 years without any planning if, in fact, we're then down to 15 or 14 students? And is that the best education, or would we be better off having more TAs available in less sections to be able to advocate for better education? Those are policy issues that are not from a management perspective, but from a policy at the board level. But you can't make those decisions unless you study the data. You brought up the issue of the demographics of the community, the age of the community. Well, yes, the age of the community is changing. In the last 8 years, we've had 4 subdivisions that have been approved, all plus 55 housing of probably about 500 units. Probably 300 of those have been, or 250 have been sold to date. So you're going to continue to see that progression. So that's not really what's causing the problem. The problem is that developers are only building what they can sell. If they can't sell a single-family home with 3 bedrooms or 4 bedrooms because the value of the land is too high, then we're not going to see those families. It's also because it's an excellent community and a stable community. Many empty nesters are saying that are no longer 59 like Joe. They're turning to 60, and all of a sudden they're part of that 60-plus population, which I joined Joe about 3 years ago. But my point is that all of those components can be looked at and need to be looked at with these 2 groups. And we can fight about whether there's a cut in the budget. There isn't. But what we have to really look at is where are we going as a community in terms of our education policies, and how is that going to be accepted in the global community itself versus just looking at going from where we are today each year, just incremental change. Incremental change is destroy the school system if it's allowed to continue.
Can I add?
Can I just build on?
go
I'm
ahead.
sorry. If I could just build on what the manager spoke of, would you be willing to share that spreadsheet with the council, and then I can take it off my to-do list, because
I've given it to the.
it's like a one-pager, and mine is like a 47-page PowerPoint presentation, so
Let's not-
No worries.
Looking for it is
I'm
that
going to take
we had
that off of
looked at
mine.
this because you and I had talked about
Correct.
this in a couple of the sessions that we had, and it provides a different perspective on where we are when you look at the value per section.
So if you
And-
can, I'm sorry.
And it's really what happens in 3 to 5 years that concerns me, not what's there today.
So if, I just want to, for those of you who are not familiar with staffing, like an elementary school, let's say, so where you see Wakefield 13 and 13, we don't walk into the year presuming there will be 2 teachers teaching kindergarten. We take a look at the kindergarten enrollment data that comes in, and we, let's say, plan for 1 kindergarten section if the enrollment data is telling us that it will be less than 23 at that particular school. I don't want you to think that we mine that data constantly, starting in January and going forward. So every week, we're updating our enrollments and the classroom choice, and we reduce in areas where there are less kids than is contractually required. Now, certainly, some may move out or move in over the year, but just know that we don't say we have 3 of every classroom and we keep it at that level, as you can see with the Wakefield second grade. Can you go back up for just a second? So if you look at Wakefield, and you see we only have 18 and 19 students progressing forward to grade 2, that's why we can have a cut there. We still have too many students to fit into one grade 1, and since September, more have been added, so this is not accurate data today, but it was accurate data September 30th. But we look to kindergarten enrollment data to see, will we run 1 section of kindergarten, 2 sections of kindergarten, or 3 sections, just to clarify. And the other piece that I wanted to state is, my first year here, we were looking at closing a school. It was quite an introduction to this lovely community. And Roland's correct, we had different enrollment data. But at that point, the community as a whole, school committee, the parents, the business owners, people came forward at multiple community sessions and said, we value neighborhood schools. We're investing in neighborhood schools. So that's been one of the reasons that we've not taken a look at. It's not due to lack of planning. It's been to date valuing what that sentiment is. The enrollment has changed significantly. We want to certainly honor our partnership with the town council, and we are going to take a look at that data, but it's going to be difficult, and we're going to need that partnership with you in order to choose well for the students of the community. And that's, we represent the taxpayers too, but the students are our primary focus.
I just wanted to add to Steve's point in regards to sections, and I know it's a very complicated formula, and it's not simple, but I was looking at, for instance, if you eliminated 1 section, became more efficient, as an example, you wouldn't have to eliminate intramural sports, middle school sports, or middle school and high school summer school programs. I'm just bringing that into comparison. And again, it's one of the last slides, the one that's scenario at 0%. And the only reason I'm bringing that up is because when I add up all of the cost, intramural sports, you have it down here as a $30,000, about a $30,000 stipend. Middle school sports for another $50,000. Middle school sports and high school summer school programs for $38,000. That equals less than 1 guidance counselor. So I struggle with that because I think kids need, or students need, an outlet. They need a well-rounded education. So I think eliminating something like that, as an example, would be very, very troubling for me. Especially when you mentioned, there are kids that are good athletes, varsity, but there's more kids that love to play basketball but aren't going to make the high school basketball team, as an example.
Sure.
So they need activity. So again, it was just a comparison I was trying to make as something to think about as we go forward.
And just so that the community's clear, we're not recommending.
I know that. I know you're not.
At this
Right.
point, because I will totally get phone calls tomorrow. But would it be possible for you to go back to the slide where it showed Matunic, Wakefield, at the class size at the top? So in the summer, right, pretend it's August 1st. What I'm doing is I'm taking, thank you, if you could scroll up, that would be awesome. So if you take, let's say, okay, see, class size contractually K through 3 is 23. So when you say sections to me, if you're thinking sections K through 8, then we are as efficiently tight as we possibly can be to be in contractual compliance. I am 100% sure of that because I manage this data on a weekly and daily basis from January to the summer. So if you take 16 and 16 and divide by 23, I'm going to run 2 sections. And of course, this is a month in, so you've had some kids out and some kids in. We can't, like many other companies or maybe even the town, I'm not sure what your structure is, we can't hire a kindergarten teacher and then in October, oops, we have less students than we then had signed up in September, and now we say you're on furlough. We are, by state law, contractually obligated to that teacher until the following August. And so if you go through K through 8, there is not one place as of our August and September data where we could cut any more sections contractually, other than to say, you know, you live in the Wakefield district, you can't go to Wakefield, we have room for you at Peacedale. I used to do that when I was the assistant superintendent in East Providence. Not pleasant. Adds to your transportation expense. It's never been what we've done here, but I can't get more efficient given the number of buildings that we have and the neighborhoods where kids are currently living now than I am K through 8. Once we get to the middle school, you can certainly take a look at electives, but there has to be places for kids to go off that 4-block content area. So if they're in a 6-period or 7-period day, I need enough sections within contractual compliance. At the high school, and that's why you see I'm cutting at the high school, the 4 sections. In 1 year to cut 4 FTEs in one building is very risky in terms of making sure that children get what they need for graduation requirements and get what they choose for some of their electives. And so I just want to be clear that conceptually, I certainly understand where you're coming from, but in terms of section efficiency with our current buildings, we can't get more efficient unless we do, as the town manager alluded to, change the configuration of buildings or change the boundaries.
So if I hear you correctly, Curtis Corner, Broad Rock High School, very efficient in regards to sections?
What I'm saying is elementary is as efficient as I can possibly get, given your already stated historical boundaries of I live on this street, I go to this school, and given the fact that we have 4 buildings.
So I'm not suggesting
But at
anything.
the high school,
Right. I'm not suggesting this. I'm just trying to have a thought process and discussion. So hypothetically, if, let's say, 3rd and 4th graders were at one location, that would become more efficient.
correct.
Okay.
Class size would be higher. Parent feedback would be, I
Horrible.
don't want my class size higher, because class size research says my child will thrive in a lower class size. But yes, it will be more effective and efficient. That's the choice that the school committee made when they put grade 5 at Broad Rock. It was a money, and it was a efficiency, and it was we had a half of a building empty that was your newest school conversation that was clearly more complex than those 3 features, but it made it very efficient. And that's where one of the largest class sizes in our district is right now, because as I said, you know, we're not saying to families, oh, you live in Wakefield, we have space for you at Peacedale. We're saying to families, next student that enrolls goes to Mrs. Collins' class, then Mrs. Stringfellow's, then Mrs. Crawford's, and it's very efficient. We can't do that in terms of we have space in kindergarten, but when we have low class sizes at Wakefield, but I can't eliminate the Wakefield teachers and just say, you all, if you're going to kindergarten, we have space for you at Peacedale or at Matunic, because we have policy boundaries right now.
Not saying it again, but if kindergarten was all in one location,
And it would be very efficient. But it's not. That's not my reality right now. I just don't want you to think that we don't look at this every day and make significant changes where there are enrollment dips. That's why
I'm not disagreeing with you.
and that's why you see there's some places where there's 2 sections, there's some places where there's 3. We historically had 3 of everything at Wakefield at one point, and then as lower enrollment was coming in, I cut a section, I cut a teacher, and therefore you only seeing 2. This kindergarten registration is going to be pretty concerning for at least 2 of our elementary schools to see if we are running 1 section of kindergarten or 2. And we have our eye on that, and kindergarten registration is in the end. March 8th.
So what you just said right now in terms of the kindergarten, not knowing where that level is going to be, I think that's where I'd be really concerned for our schools, with the fact that, it's not like once they get to 2nd grade, it's not like there's going to be an influx of students potentially.
Correct. Birth rate is
Right.
lower,
Right.
as Roland stated, so we're getting less students into our kindergarten, and that's why you're seeing this sort of a pattern, a trend in the data. And we have, we've done a lot of probing. We're meeting with, we have elementary principals meeting with parents this month to even get better, hopefully, on asking parents if you are coming to our community, if you are, more importantly, leaving our community, why? But our biggest problem is that there are less children being born here. And then there are a couple of other options for them, which are private and charter school.
Any further discussion?
I just wanted to say we are aware of all of these factors, and that is one of the reasons we are embarking on the facilities study. So stay tuned. We'd really like your input throughout the process. If we can set up work sessions or...
Sure, absolutely. We're absolutely willing to work with you and hear your feedback, too. Any further discussion here at the table?
Yeah, I appreciate that we're going to be looking at the facilities study. I think that's a good start. I don't think it's a silver bullet for any of these long-term trends that we're seeing, demographics or fixed cost increases. And I think, it's impressive what the school committee has done. I think it's been 8 years of austerity, really, that you've been going through. And, we've seen it in, declining school performance. I do think when they say that there are cuts here, there are cuts here because the school committee is looking at it as they're providing less service. They have less teachers who can teach kids, as well as other positions. And I think it's distressing to see that we're providing less service, and it seems like the service declines are outpacing the student declines. And I think that's what's distressing to a lot of parents. I do think that, there are real rational concerns around technology, how much expanding into the lower grades, whether that's a cost that can be controlled, or the dual language immersion, how that experiment might drive future cost increases for teachers. But overall, I think it's a pretty austere budget that looks to control costs. I think I'll be supporting the 2% that you're asking for. I do think that it's really important to get away from these sort of conflicts or discussions that we're locked into. We have to look at ways of finding new revenue streams. I really would encourage us all to try and think of a way to see South Kingstown establish an endowment fund for our public schools. I think, we have enough alumni, people who care in the community to really start a fund that could help cover small costs at first, but if you can build up an endowment fund like that, you can start generating revenue. So I hope that we can work together on innovative solutions like that. Thank you.
The slide I just put up, I think, deals with what Kristen's been talking about and I've been talking about. Certainly, I'm not critical of her defining existing sections with what she's working with the buildings. But you can see here, when you look to the high school right now, average membership per class is the 224, 230, 234, 268 in 2017. When you look at where you are with the earlier grades, you're in at 197, 189. So as those move in, there's going to be continued compression. That's why NESDIC, when they did their last study in November of 2016, predicted that by the time we get to the year 2021, we're going to be down to 2,770 students. And that's where, when we talk about what happens if you continue to have the same physical, or the boundaries, let's call them the boundaries for each of the different schools, what's that going to mean as far as the number of students per classroom? And that's where the policy issues are really going to become very difficult. Yes, there was a study done, and there was a proposal to consider closing Wakefield School 5 years ago. But at that time, the town had the luxury of a higher enrollment where the classroom rates per student per teacher were significantly higher or closer to what the max values were. We're seeing that's lessened over the last few years, and what we're assuming based on the enrollment projections is that that's going to continue. So that's the point that I think that needs to have the education within the community. It's not that anybody's trying to change the way the neighborhood school concept was set up in South Kingstown, but the question is, how do you afford that going forward, and are you affording it by reducing the quality of education in other areas that are necessary? So it's certainly a balance that I'm not qualified to make a decision on, but I am qualified to be able to look at the trends and be able to tell you that there's some issues ahead of us that have to be addressed, but when they are addressed, it's going to become very expensive.
Thank you, Steve.
I just had one more quick question. When we talk, you said something earlier, Kristen, about West Kingston having the highest poverties, being the highest poverty school. Is that just based off of the free and reduced lunch program?
Sorry. Yes, it's based on free and reduced lunch. That's what the federal government uses in order to qualify a Title I school, a poverty-based school. So historically, West Kingston has been our poverty school. Our second highest poverty has been Peacedale, but these are recalculated every May for the next year, and that's how we deploy Title I staff. And so there are federal regulations that say that there have to be more Title staff in the high poverty schools than in the not high poverty schools.
Any other discussion? If not, I would ask any members of the audience if they would like to come up and ask a question or make a statement. Come to the podium, please, and state your name. And I ask you to limit your discussion to 3 minutes or less.
My name is Bill Rosen, Kingston. Just for your information, I've been around here a long time. I'm much older than most of you, as such, and I remember back in the late 80s, there was a proposal to put all the kindergarten classes into one school, and that was roundly defeated by the town and the people in the town. How do I know that? I chaired that committee back in the late 80s. Just for your information, so I don't think we're going to be going back to that, particularly since in those days there were many, many more students in the school system than there are now. I did have one question, however, and that is, do you have any idea of how many retirements you're going to have this year?
Retirements are tricky ever since the pension reform by once Treasurer Raimondo, now Governor Raimondo. So there was a fixed period of time that teachers needed to work. It was a 28-year. You were eligible to retire and receive 60% funds, and if you stayed for 32 years, and this was regardless of age. Now there is a very complicated formula that has to do with years of service and age, and so it's becoming almost impossible for us to predict. Even if we know the age of the teacher and how many years the teachers have taught in South Kingstown, we happen to have many, many teachers who taught somewhere else or were in the armed forces or in incentive by contract. So if teachers notify us by June 1st then they are, if they have taught 15 years in South Kingstown and they are not resigning, not moving out of state, but retiring with the Employees Retirement System of Rhode Island, then they're eligible for 5 years health care in retirement. And so that's been helpful here. I was the assistant superintendent in East Providence and Scituate, and folks would notify us the day before school, the day of school. That's really tricky to find a teacher replacement. That's what I did on Labor Day weekend in a former life. So that's been very helpful, but it's not a law, it's not a policy, it's a contractual provision for those who are eligible for that incentive.
Since you're going into contract negotiations, maybe it would be possible to put some sort of a time limit on it.
Maybe.
Okay, thank you.
Bill, just to mention, even with a retirement at a senior rate and a replacement with somebody at a starting rate, because you've still got the health care and retirement cost that's going to follow with the new teacher coming in, there isn't an appreciable difference between what the true cost will be for that replacement employee. So there may be some difference, but it's not going to be significant because you're going to be picking up that health care cost for the 5-year period. And health care right now is going to be running around on a family plan about $16,500 to $17,000 before the copay. And that is something that can be negotiated within the contract.
You're on, by the way. I like the jersey. I bet everybody in the room likes it too.
Thank you. Hi, my name is Lily Schofield, and I go to Curtis Corner Middle School. And I came tonight because I feel like I can speak for myself and a lot of the other students at my school that we have a very well-working system and a lot of great teachers. And I've actually not lived here for very long. I lived in Maine for most of my life, but my parents lived here when they were young, and we moved back because we felt like they had a very good education system, and we feel education is very important for living the rest of your life happily and healthily. So I just wanted to say that I really like my school district, and I hope you guys vote for having funding for it.
Thank you very
So much.
Lily, it wasn't too long ago that when I was in school, I used to come and advocate. So I hope that even though you're new to town, that you'll continue to do this. And
That was a long time ago.
Shut up. But I hope to see you at more meetings and continue advocating. It's great to see that.
Would anybody else like to come up to the podium?
Jim O'Neill, Matunic. Just a couple of comments. Abel asked a few minutes ago, come up with some ideas to help revenue source of our budgets. As you know, the state welcomes an awful lot of refugees as well as those with visa here, short-term and otherwise. I'm not sure, and I don't understand why the state is not covering the ESL teacher costs. Makes no sense to me whatsoever. Why burden one community versus another if you have to hire more teachers, more aides for that? But it makes no sense why that's not a state cost, period. Secondly, on that area, the governor has for 5 years as treasurer and now governor, but she's advocated a strong internet system and that every school, every student be presented with either the iPads or the computer availability. Every year we go over what classes should be eligible for, and I don't understand why that's also not a state, just like they're helping repair the broken down schools. Why in the world doesn't the state handle all of our internet, computer, iPad work? Makes no sense to go to that community. I remember the days 20 years ago, a lot of parents would move here. Remember, I've been in real estate, and I handled these parents who came here because we would do IEP plans with kids with IQs of 170. We were just known as the IEP capital in Rhode Island, and we were up to 22, 23% 15, 20 years ago. Now we're in the 10, 12, 13% range. So no community should have that kind of burden. There's certain kind of costs there. The state should be fairly allocating to all the cities and towns. So I think it's there. It's just going to take probably the General Assembly and others to convince the governor that the budget needs to be much more reflective of that. A couple of things we talked about earlier. Warwick is closing 9 schools. They've closed 3, reassigned middle schools, did 3, and they have 3 more combination elementaries to do. Warwick, incredibly, and I can't explain the demographics, but I do have the numbers here, 13,500 kids to 9,800 over the last, since 2000. That's incredible, almost 25%. Warwick. This is incredible. But the reason they haven't lost all the monies that a town like South Kingstown is, and I have the Education, Equity, and Property Tax Relief Act here, is that Warwick does not have our tax capacity, which is a key there, but also to enrollment loss is really the key. South Kingstown, we're down, 4,383 without preschool, down to almost 3,000, so we've lost better than 30%, almost 33% of the kids. Incredible, absolutely incredible. We're down $10.5 million to 6.7, 6.8 million, down about 38, 39% in the funding formula, and you throw in some of the other stats. So it gives you an idea that the funding formula, in a way, certainly parallels that volume loss of our students. So you can't argue with it. My concerns here tonight is I don't think we're thinking about the other 20, 22, 25,000 people in town. This is where the school committee comes in. There's certainly a lot of families, a lot of kids, and the kids are our future. The students, they are our future. But my concern's that we really need to think savings, we need to think rainy day funds. And I've brought this up every year for the last 18 years that I've been involved at this town. And I think the writing is on the wall now with Washington. Medicaid, you're going to see vouchers, you're going to see health care costs, certainly confusing. You can't budget forward with what we don't know, but what we do know is frightening in terms of what may have to fall on our property taxpayers. Absolutely frightening. And on a South Kingstown basis, education funding formula, we've got another 2-3 years on that. The car equalization tax. Well, no matter how you work it, those less run well school committees in towns, Providence, $60 rate for the same car, Pawtucket, $49, Cranston, $44. We're $18.71, I think. Narragansett is $16.46. Charlestown, $13.08 for a car. Guess who is going to wind up receiving some of that funding? And it's not us. We're going to somehow or another, it's going to hurt our taxpayers even more. So I wish you'd realize that. Pension costs, Steve, I've talked about this year after year. It's possible that Mr. Magazzina, despite the Trump rally in the stock market here, Mr. Magazzina, I think, is faced with the fact that he's going to have to drop the expected rate return from 7.5%. My guess is 6.5%. And I can promise you that's another $300,000 to $500,000 out for our town. So we are facing some tremendous headwinds, and yet I just don't see this collectively being thought about here. And this is why you have to take the roughest, toughest course right now in regards to this budget, because you just cannot give away money right now with the student lost. 200 kids the last 2 years times $20,000 per student, that's $4 million of value of our students given away. Something's got to give here. And as you know, back in 2009, I brought this up meeting after meeting, year after year. And it's too bad we didn't put an RFP together at that time. Bob Hicks saw it. He saw staffing savings, transportation combinations, and at the time he was talking about reopening South Road, and maybe, or not even that, closing Curtis Corner or some combination in there. We didn't do it. We passed it down to the next year, and as Roland's talked about, here we are year after year after year, and we have no policy, we have no plan. The only plan we have in this community is Steve's 6-year running average of the capital improvement programs. That's all we have. of which you have $500,000 in there for the parking lot of Curtis Corner School in a couple of years. This is crazy. Anyway, I don't understand it, but I think the writing's on the wall for savings here. My biggest concern is the plan, the RFP being put out. This should have been done back in 2009, 10. You remember Dr. Mega said in 2012, we're over-facilitated. It has been, the writing's been on the wall here. And here we go again. And if we don't open in September a new plan, now that's rushing at this, believe me, and they've had to do it in Warwick. There have been screams. North Kingstown closed a couple elementary schools. Everyone else is doing this that had to do it, except South Kingstown. But if you wait to 2018, you're asking for a political crazy year. Think about that. Think about that. This council, you are the leaders. You've got to make decisions. I can't give a quart of vodka to an alcoholic, and this is basically what you're doing if you give 2% here right now. You need to get an order in place from this school committee that they're going to go at this RFP immediately and try to plan for next September. Otherwise, you can forget 2018. It's just going to be off another 3 years. Guaranteed. We know politics. I know this group knows politics, and we can't put ourselves in that position. And also, too, Abel talked about services, and that's why I gave the math the last time. Back in 2001-2, when we opened Broad Rock, and I'm just looking at the NEA certified SK, we were averaging 1 student per 12. 1 student per 12. We're down to 975 now per 1. Not bad. Parents have never had it better. Our students have never had this kind of relationship. It's been a great relationship. Now, go back to my business in real estate. I can tell you, and I've told you this since day one, that the families that move here want 5 elementary schools open. They want it from K. If it's through 6, fine. But that is what they demand. Middle schools, up in the air. How many transportation costs you have to include by transferring kids, Broad Rock, this, that, elementary, high school kids. This is crazy, our transportation system. There are savings there, but not the way we're configured. Now, what has to happen, too, and I hate to see this happen with the RFP here, but Steve was right. He said it at many, many meetings here. We've got some policy situations to straighten out here. I don't think that the high school can ever be converted for sale to someone that wants apartments or condominiums. And if I remember correctly, Steve, maybe help me out on Broad Rock here, but was that school not built to engineering standards that could be expanded by 50% or so, or we use the space and that's impossible, and maybe Curtis Corner would be the school that has to be enlarged if that high school just winds up because of its age not being
There's no
near.
school that can't be added to.
Okay.
We've proven that over the last 30 years. The core facilities at Broad Rock certainly are specific to the 400 students or 380 students that it was built for. But that doesn't mean that there couldn't be additions that were placed on that facility. We own the land. We've got the ability to make whatever improvements we need.
Okay.
Jim, I don't want to cut you short, but I want you to finish up, but I would like...
Nope, I'd be happy to come back because I have 2 other issues on this if you got another audience people that want to talk. I'm almost finished, but if you would give me 1 minute. I always keep this one article because I remember Kristen, I always battling with her, but I remember back, I put 2011 on this, so I hope that's the right date. Vice Chairman Anthony Mega asked School Superintendent Christian Stringfellow if closing a school would create overcrowding to the point of damaging educational quality. Ms. Stringfellow said no, in quotes. And lastly, I brought up the last meeting. No one asked me for copies of it, but in the Providence Journal, back in October, Providence Journal compared Barrington and Marblehead, Mass. They tried to find same economic, North Kingstown, Beverly, Mass., Cumberland versus Weymouth, and Smithfield versus Plymouth. All of our cohorts, which really are their cohorts, they average $14,500 per student. All those Massachusetts folks with $13,800 per. These are some really great quality school districts, which were in here. We're $20,000 per student now. $5,500 to $6,000 more than a Cumberland. A Barrington offers everything, and you could take a couple million off because of Barrington. They don't have the same transportation costs, but Cumberland does, North Smithfield does, North Kingstown does. That's $15 to $18 million of excess money. So I'm asking you to think about this community's future, and I really think we need to really plan on a rainy day business budget. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. O'Neill. Would anybody else like to come up to the podium to ask any questions or to make comments? Any more discussion from the school committee?
I just want to say thank you very much, Lily, for your positive comments. That was great.
I'm sorry, I thought you had a crowd behind me. I have to tell you, this is one of the best size audiences I've seen here in my 20 years, to have 7, 8 people here, probably a lot of friends and parents of many of the school kids. What is not appreciated here is what the council and school committee, the time you put in, and I certainly appreciate it. I've spent 20 years up here and 14 years over here. Steve, the salary folks, I just wish there was more appreciation of the amount of work, time, pressure, especially individual children, parents, brutal, and then the 5 leaders of this community, tough decisions you have to make here, because you've got to look globally. They can look internally. You really have to look globally, and that's where it is. But on behalf of those 31,801 people who are not here tonight, I thank you for your service, and I thank everyone involved with the town for their service.
Thank you, Jim. That means a lot. Thank you.
Meg, I just had one more thing to say. I don't know if the school committee caught this. It's not relative to the budget, but I just thought it was important that you guys got this message. At our last town council meeting, I said it, but again, I don't know if it got back to you guys. I was really heartened and impressed to see that you guys stood by the trans policy that you developed, the transgender policy, and one of the 4 communities in Rhode Island that said that they're going to stand by that. And I know how much time and effort you put into that, and I love what Kristen said about how she got virtually no, backlash on it, that it was all positive feedback, and I think that speaks to what a wonderful community we have, and I just really, I appreciate you guys standing by that, and it's impressive. It's not always easy to do the right thing, and I just want to say that I thought that was wonderful.
Any other questions or comments? Steve, anything you have to say? You all set? Oh, we have one more person. Please come up and state your name.
Hi, my name's Sarah Schofield. I'm Lily's mom. I'm just going to say one thing with Mr. O'Neill. He's right. The children are our future. And I hope that's what you're all thinking about, because the time is now. It's not later. It's not in 10 years. It's not 10 years ago. It's today. And these are our kids we're talking about in our community, and we need it. So I'm going to ask you to approve.
Thank you. Thank you very much. If there's no other discussion, I would say this meeting is adjourned.